WDB, its staff, or management.
Welcome to Common Sense with your host, John Federico.
We don't need no education.
John will be taking your calls at 610-664-4100 to discuss headline issues that affect you, your family, and your community.
We don't need no thought control.
Call John at 610-664-4100 to sound off on topics and events that are important to you.
No dark sarcasm in the classroom.
Now, here's the host of Common Sense, John Federico.
Good morning. This is John Federico, and you're listening to Common Sense. The number at the station here is 610-664-4100 to call in with your questions or hopefully your suggestions. This week we've been focusing on the problems with changing the system that we have. And there is some encouraging news out there, and it's strangely, I was reading this in the paper yesterday. It comes from California, not the kind of place you'd think you'd get really, really encouraging news about the future. But in California, they are pushing a Proposition 14 through the ballot because in California, the people of California have the right to, well, it has to get approved by the legislature, and it has been, but they petitioned to have things added to their state constitution or made into law by a petition process. And Proposition 14 is going to allow for a two-step election process in the future for the state of California. I believe it only extends to their local, to their state Senate and their state House representatives and to the governor. And the way they're going to do it is they're going to, in the primary, it's going to be an open primary with no party affiliation. It could be a party affiliation, but anybody can run in that primary with the right number of petitions, and from that pool, the top two vote getters will run in the fall in the general election. Now, it's kind of the process we were talking about getting to. The only difference is I'm not necessarily sure that the state should step in and choose the party nominee for a general election. My suggestion was similar to that. It was only that they would have a process where the state has an election, and if no candidate garners a majority, that they would have a runoff election. In this way, you could walk into a voting booth and vote for who you really wanted to vote for the first time, and then the second time around, if the top two vote getters, if they didn't have 50 or more than 50%, they would run again, and you get the vote for the guy, the lesser of two evils, or potentially even the guy you really wanted. Much better process. And what it does is it's very destructive to the parties, which is a big benefit, which is why you're going to see in California, even in this somewhat different version that the Californians are pushing through, that the Republicans and the Democrats in the party are going to stand together and try to block this from becoming law, because you can see where this could lead. Their arguments are that you're going to get fringe candidates like David Duke that are going to become viable and so forth. If it's a fringe candidate, I'm sorry, if it's a fringe candidate that garners a majority of the vote, it's not a fringe candidate. I mean, if the people of a state or of a certain area wish to elect somebody and they get more than 50%, how can you say that's a fringe? Now, I don't know much about David Duke. What I know about him, I'm not crazy about. I understand that he was a Ku Klux Klan member, much like Senator Byrd was of the Democratic Party, who still, I believe, they're rolling him in wheelchairs in the vote in the Senate. So somehow that doesn't necessarily is a problem. You can be forgiven in politics based on party. And you'll see that soon, because that silly thing with Mr. Sestak and Mr. Obama, it seems to be that the Democrats don't feel it should be investigated. They don't feel that it warrants investigation. But see, if it was a quid pro quo promise, then it should be investigated regardless of party. You can't promise jobs. I know that they do it, but you're not supposed to do it. And as you saw the governor of Chicago, the governor of Illinois that did it, if you get caught on it, it's a serious matter. You're not supposed to do those things. But government is just so out of touch. So anyway, that's interesting in California. Very encouraging news. And if you look at the United States Constitution and the times that we've gone back to correct things that were mistakes in the Constitution, whether it's the Prohibition or when they went back, I think it was the 12th Amendment, they went back and they corrected the problem with the election of the president because in 1800, I don't know if you know the history, but here, all of you know the history here, but in 1800, there was an election between Jefferson and Adams, and Jefferson succeeded in getting a majority of the electoral votes, but so did Aaron Burr. I think it was Aaron Burr. And they had the same number of votes, and the way the Constitution had been written, it didn't declare one of them necessarily a winner, even though everybody felt that Jefferson was the guy running for president and Alan Burr was supposed to be his vice president. They were kind of almost a ticket, but they had the same number of votes. It became very confusing. It was finally decided by Jefferson's enemies because they were the ones that had the power to push a couple votes in the House of Representatives the right way to get him elected because they thought Burr was really dangerous. And anyway, they went back, I think it was 1804, 1805, they went back and they changed it through the 12th Amendment. They said, okay, look, we made a mistake here. What we mean to say is we're going to vote for the president distinctly and the vice president distinctly. And then they went through this whole machinations of what happens if someone doesn't get the majority and so forth. But they went back and corrected it. Now, why is it we can't go back and correct simple things that are wrong with our Constitution? And everyone loves the Constitution. It's been a very empowering document for the people for years and years. But government has found ways of encroaching on our freedoms and our economics by mis-explaining the Constitution to the people, by purposely misinterpreting the Constitution in conjunction with the court system, to the point where I think we need to go back and resolutely say, you cannot raise our income tax above a certain amount. You cannot seize our assets under these conditions. You cannot hold power for a certain number of years in a certain way. And the way you do that is you say, well, what's causing the Constitution to be so corrupted? And you have to say it's the party and the favors and the people that are in power. And if we can look to California for once and look at what they're doing out there with Proposition 14, it's interesting to see where they're going to go with this and the arguments are going to be made. Oh my goodness, you're going to get a fringe. I mean, they're making it simple. It's simple. You get to go in and run. If you get more votes, the top two guys don't get a majority, but you get more votes than the other guys. They run again, and the people get the vote for their candidate, and someone walks away with a majority. And then wouldn't that be nice? So that was kind of an interesting and a positive development. Something else I checked out today because I was sent an email from a friend is there is actually a web page if you want to really scare the pants off of yourself. Go to www.usdebtclock.org. It will scare the crap out of you. It keeps track of the total debt, the total deficit, the total debt per person, the total debt per worker that files a W-2, keeps track of all these things, and it runs continuously. In fact, I tried to print it out. You can't print it out because I guess the software they use, it's generating these numbers instantaneously. They're moving so quickly in of course, an upward direction. So that was a surprising website. I'm going to keep that on my desktop and just look at it when I start to lose my enthusiasm for trying to change things because we are really in a bad way, and we're going to do something about that very soon. Okay, now we're talking about changing the government. We're talking about potentially putting forward amendments to the Constitution to change it in a positive way permanently. This is going to be in conjunction with trying to throw out every office holder that voted for either the bailout or the health care bill. They got to go. Those people have to go. They have totally lost. In fact, the guys who voted the stimulus too, they have to go too. They just they have no idea what they're doing. Obama's now pushing a new stimulus. I mean, what's the point? What do they think they're doing? You know, the stimulus would be to get people to re-stimulate the economy through spending. How about like taking the money? They spent billions and billions of this, and they say they're running out of the $800 billion, they need another $200 billion, like it's chump change. How about taking the money and I'm not for big government-sponsored programs, but if you were going to build something like they did with the Hoover Dam, even if you did it by encouraging low-interest loans for companies to come in and build the product, how about something like the railroad system they talked about, where you're going to have a bullet train that is going to be the envy of the world? How about something like that? That's a place where we could spend money sensibly. Just like, you look at NASA, and they're going to cut the NASA budget. They've been talking about cutting NASA. I mean, it's a place where you're going to employ a lot of engineers, a lot of smart people. You're going to get a lot of benefits from R&D. It seems pointless to cut a few billion out of NASA when you're spending another $200 billion papering sidewalks with it. I don't know what they're doing with the money. So I think that the idea of just re-stimulating is asinine. and they should do something about that. So I'm not in favor of it, and I think that anybody that votes for it's got to go. They just don't get it. Yeah, you need to keep the liquidity. You need to make sure people have opportunity. You need to encourage them to work. And to some extent, through government projects, there can be some stimulus. But just giving people more money is not necessarily a stimulant. Okay, they did it before. What happened? If they're going to give another $200 billion, where is it going to stop? They think it's just about to get going. I know they're worried about a double dip recession, but I think they should trying to get workers to produce things, not to consume things. We can sell to the rest of the world as well, including China, which is growing richer by the day. We need to be competitive. The more you pile debt on us, the less competitive we're going to be. So, if you're going to do any type of a stimulus whatsoever, you should argue it. You shouldn't just ram it through. You should argue it on its merits. What exactly do you propose that it's going to produce? I think you're just creating pools of money they can buy the next election with. That's what I think they're doing. So, anyway, if you read The Telegraph, which is a UK publication, front page article, they talk about the Obama eyeing a fresh stimulus package. So that was another piece. That's a piece of discouraging news. We did have some encouraging news, and yesterday we talked about other encouraging news, including sending troops to the border, which is where the troops probably should be deployed, the National Guard, and so forth. So if you have any ideas and you'd like to call in about how we can move this discussion forward, I know I'm being a little broad, and I know I'm being a little ADD with some of my thoughts. But the problem here is that government needs to be put under control permanently. My thinking is, and I'm going to be going to break in a few minutes. I'm going to leave you to think about this. My thinking is that government acts like children. They're having a party. The parents stop by. They hear the car in the driveway. They turn the music down. They hear the door. They put the alcohol away. The parents come in. The kids act like nothing's going on. Kind of like if you ever watch Risky Business with Tom Cruise, parents come back, everything's all put back together, and as soon as the parents leave again, as soon as we're not paying attention, they'll just break out the alcohol and start partying again. So right now, the government, you see what's happening with Obama. He gets in there, he wants to do all these crazy things. He does a few of them. He realizes he's scared the crap out of people. He's got to start slowing it down a little bit. He's going to send some troops to the border now. He's going to pretend that he's actually in favor of, enforcing U.S. immigration law. And he's going to do it for a little while, hope people calm down about it, and then they're going to come back into control again. See, they know that people are busy. People have busy lives, and they get easily distracted by all the noise and the nonsense that goes on in the world. And so the government is always attentive. The government is always watching to take more power. They're not attentive about cleaning up oil spills. They're not attentive about doing the things that we empower them to do for our benefit, but they're very attentive about every opportunity to encroach in power, to mortgage our future, to borrow money so they have more money to spend of ours. I mean, you'd think the way the government talks that they're going to keep spending our money forever and ever and ever, and this is a good thing somehow. I mean, who made them in charge of spending our money? You think about income tax, when they first adopted it back in 1913, they were arguing about a few percent, just a few percent of the really, real high wage earners. Okay, maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to have a stronger federal government. And they pass these things, and it's so out of control. So anyway, I think that we should concentrate on ways of, yes, throw everybody out if we can, but then let's produce a system when we have those people in place that they can vote it in, that we don't have repeats where parties come back into power. We want the power of the individual to triumph, the power of the citizen to triumph. We need to make sure that people have the power to change their government as quickly as need be, not some crazy judge to say that the people don't have the constitutional right. And I'll make one more note before I go to break, because I remember this in Ocean City a few years ago. I think it was Ocean City, New Jersey. The people of the city actually got together, and through referendum, they dictated that taxes couldn't be, at some certain level. They basically handcuffed the committee that runs Ocean City. I think it was Ocean City, New Jersey. I might be misplacing the town. In New Jersey, the judge came back and ruled that the people don't have the right to put those restrictions on government. And I thought that was probably about 10 years ago. That was just so scary to think that the people don't have the right to restrict the government. I mean, what kind of probably some liberal judge. I mean, what was he thinking? The people by referendum want to do something, they should be allowed to do it. we're not going to have mob rule here, but you have to have the ability through some process to be able to control your government and be able to control your taxation. Somehow you keep getting told you don't have the right. It's insane. So we're going to go to break right now. And if you would be good enough to call in, the number here at Common Sense is 610-664-4100. You've been listening to John Federico. So please call in when you have the chance. Good morning. You're back with John Federico, and you're listening to Common Sense. The number here at the station, 610-664-4100. We were talking about some developments that seem to be headed in the right direction. I have one more development I want to talk about today, which seems to be headed in the same direction, the correct direction. And it's interesting because I'm frequently frustrated to think about changing a large government when we can't seem to change even our local governments. I mean, you look at people that have, in small communities, that have a lot of control over their property taxes because they elect the committee people directly, or the commissioners, whoever adopts the tax raising resolutions on their income, on their property, and yet they can't rein in even their own property taxes. So you start to say, wow, it's frustrating, it's impossible, we can never change anything. Well, then you see today, well, I don't know, it's today, but in this spring, Tennessee is apparently passing a resolution it's a constitutional amendment in their state to permanently ban any income or payroll tax. It passed the Senate Finance Committee back in March, and it's headed to a vote, and that's great. I mean, you look at a state saying we're never going to let you tax income. We're not just going to make it a law. It's going to be a constitutional amendment. So states are moving in the right direction. It makes Tennessee more competitive, you would think. Somebody that has a high income or wants to have a high income or wants to have any income is going to say, hey, I can move to Tennessee, and I'm going to get some benefit out of that if you're in a neighboring state. The United States is going to be in that battle worldwide, and I hope that we're going to be smart enough to do something like that Tennessee did, to limit income tax. We obviously would have a hard time right now completely eliminating it, though I'd like to see it happen. At least we could put a constitutional amendment that would slowly phase it out, making us the most competitive, or keeping us the most competitive country, in the world. You have to look at the way government looks at us, because we keep looking at changing government, and government keeps looking at us and saying we're going to change the people. I kind of think it's a struggle that way sometimes. Washington wants to change the country, and if the country doesn't wise up and start to try to really change Washington, Washington's going to win. And I don't mean Washington the man. You see, government is an entity, as we talked about before. Government decided long ago that they should tax your labor. Government decided more recently they can borrow against your future labor. And government now prints out, as it pleases, as much money as it wants in your name, because the money that it prints out in it, just like the debt that it encumbers our country with, it's based on your labors. It's based on the people's production. So we need to think about that from the idea of what government does. We talked yesterday at length about how government's actions and government rubbing against private sector distorts the market, distorts the economy. Everything government touches, it distorts or corrupts. You don't think this is true, and you look back and you say, how did BP gain those waivers? And then you look at where they gave their money, and you wonder who they bought. And you say, how did Goldman Sachs manage to produce and sell such derivatives? And you look at who Goldman gave their money to. And they basically have so much money, these companies, that they can buy our politicians. And they do. And that's what you look at saying, well, how are we going to ever change this? I mean, I know campaign financing reform has been talked about. I know there are issues with that and there are problems with that. But we have to look at some way of decoupling the big moneyed interests from our government. And I know that's been talked about for a long time, probably back to the day of Hamilton versus Jefferson, where I think in that argument, your Jefferson was a little more correct, that we needed to encourage business in such a way that you need people to create a business environment, and they did that. And then when it got to the time of Jackson, when he was battling the bank, the second bank of the United States, it was a much more drawn out process. And the banking, he wasn't worried. The bank actually strange in that day, just like AT&T when they broke up AT&T. The bank was a monopoly of sorts. But it had pretty much a beneficial effect. What he was worried about, Jackson, if you remember the discussion or the argument at the time, he was worried about the power that they could exert not necessarily that they even were exerting. It's more what the power they could have. And I think that history has borne out the fact that he and, I'm not a big Jefferson fan, but Jefferson, they were correct in their concern about moneyed interests controlling the country through the politician. You see, I don't fault the moneyed interests for trying to control the government. I don't fault the foreigners that influence our government, whether it's the Israeli lobby or whether it's the oil lobby or whether it's the, who knows what other lobbies are out there controlling our government. Maybe the Chinese have a lobby, And they look at us and they say, well, they have a process that we can distort. We're going to go in there and control the government. We don't need to go and conquer the country. We can take all their wealth just by controlling their government, and it's so easy. So you look at where these people get their money from. So how do you get around that? I mean, I think the way to get around it is to make the government less important. I mean, isn't that the answer? The government, the only places it should be important is in a regulatory aspect. And as you can see from Goldman to British Petroleum, the only responsibility we gave the government, they couldn't carry out properly. They're the only responsibilities they should have, I mean, you tell them, okay, you're going to regulate the oil industry. You give them all the power to do that. They have so much power to do that, and they screw it up. They don't bother. They get bought off. They have the ability to regulate the financial sector. Instead, now they're passing a Senate bill, which is going to just create more cronyism. It's going to give more power to government, but instead it doesn't. It has ambiguous laws, a lot of ambiguous laws. It says things in such a broad way that, in theory, they could regulate any transaction, but in practice they'll regulate only the ones they aren't bought off to regulate. So, that's the problem you have. You have to think about the future politician. Do you think the future politician is going to be less corrupt than the current politician? Do you think the future inspector is going to be less corrupt than the current inspector? You have to put the law simple so people know that they're being evaded. And they're passing the financing reform bill. Chris Dodd, thank God he's retiring. But, I mean, the man's been a disservice to his country. He's awful. They're all awful. I mean, Specter's gone, thank God. He won't be running again, I don't think. Dodd looks like he's retiring, which is good. Go home. You've screwed the country up enough. It's time for you to go home. Let's get some people in there. They don't have to be a Republican. They don't have to be a Democrat necessarily. Somebody in there that's going to care about the country and understand about the people. Come from the people, care for the people. Okay, not care for the people like create a social safety net that no one has to work. No, not that kind of care. Care for the people to maintain a balanced playing field. That's what people expect. I often cite the lottery, and I say, well, the lottery system is the most uneven distribution of all you can possibly think of. It's like a casino, but let's say the lottery. Everyone pays $1, $5, $10, $20, and 99% of those people lose, and one person wins, or two people win. Sometimes a couple people win or more, but it's grossly uneven. The reason why people keep playing the lottery is because they understand it's fair. And so if we live in a country where you see someone benefiting, and they're benefiting because they're working harder, they're working smarter, they're working more efficiently, you say, okay, that guy's getting rewarded more than I am, but he deserves it, or it's fair. The system's fair. We're all playing by the same rules. When government gets involved, it should even the rules. So everybody plays by those rules. Instead, what government does is it picks winners and losers. And it was pretty obvious if you paid attention over the years what they were doing. I mean, it was pretty obvious. They picked winners and losers. But since 2008, it's just so in your face. We're going to let this company prosper. Private companies, we're going to bail out. This company, we're going to bail out. Those stockholders will be rewarded. The bondholders will be screwed. Oh, we're going to bail out GM, even though we know they're not going to make it. I mean, GM had an unsustainable situation. You don't bail out unsustainable situations. They have to go bankrupt. Through bankruptcy, they can renegotiate things and make them sustainable. And I don't think bankruptcy court lets you leave bankruptcy court until you have a sustainable situation. They have to sign off on it, the judge. And they've been pretty good, those bankruptcy courts, from what I understand. I've rarely, if ever, heard a complaint about a bankruptcy court, especially for the big companies. They do a pretty good job. But instead, it seems like, not to disparage him too much, it seems like the union was going to get screwed. The union supported Obama. Obama had to give our $20 or $30 billion to GM to make sure the union got taken care of. Okay? Not even the union people, but the union upper guys, the guys that gave to his campaign, the guys that got the vote out for him. And then GM could go under. Because when they went under, they wouldn't have to pay anybody, pensions or otherwise. Because I think their pensions were self-funded, if I'm not mistaken. So that's one of the things they're moving against now. Hopefully, it's a smart move. I mean, if your whole pension's tied to your company, and your company goes under at some point, you have no pension. So the way they create pensions, they should examine that if you're going to depend on them in a certain way. But in any event, it's just ugly, and you see government comes in and picks winners and picks losers. And, Philadelphia is like that, and if you live in Philadelphia or you're surrounded by Philadelphia, you know how Philadelphia works. Back in the street administration, you got to pay to play, basically. If you're going to give to street at the time, or you're going to be a union that gave to them, you can work. If you want to get a big contract for the city and you're not a union supported, Mr. Street, you weren't going to get the job. You had to be unionized. I mean, that's crazy. A union had its place, and union still has its place. But union, just like government, is a corrupting influence. I mean, it really is. You look at why people unionize. Yes, okay, fine. You're going to say, we're going to allow people to do what if businesses did they would call collusion. See, collusion is when companies get together and do price setting and other schemes. Unions do the same thing. Unions get together and do price setting. We're not going to work unless everybody gets this, this particular price. Doesn't matter on merit or whatever. And so unions have if anything, they make things much less efficient. I'm not for big companies exploiting workers, and Samuel Gompers certainly was justified in founding his federal trade union. And the Roosevelt administration, for all of its faults, Theodore Roosevelt, was right to bust some of the trusts. He was right to talk about the federal troops taking over the coal mines if they didn't reach a resolution, and stepping in when he needed to. And sometimes government does things, and you say, well, government really shouldn't be so powerful, but thank goodness they were able to do what they did. Like if we have to defend the nation in war, you don't like when you're in the Army, you're told what to do by your senior officer, and you have to do it, and you say, well, this isn't right. This isn't democracy. But for a short time, or by a voluntary sign-up, as it's done today, you agree to give up certain rights in order to serve your country, and we give up our collective ability to defend ourselves and put that in the hands of the government, and we say that's one of their powers, and we empower them to do that. I don't mind that. There's always a concern there. There has been historically, but we've been pretty good with our military. We have a wonderful military and a respectful military. The scarier part is the government and the way that they just keep, beating at our freedoms at every opportunity. And when people actually go to take some of their rights back, it seems almost astonishing that they would do it, that they would be bold enough to take on the government, because the government, you can't beat City Hall. If you want to. In fact, a friend of mine told me a long time ago, I used to fight. If I had a problem with a township or a city, I would fight them. I would come out, and he says, no, you got to go to the cocktail parties and, give the political donations. And then when you need something, you call the zoning officer and you get it. And I always refuse to do that. Probably not because I'm a good guy necessarily, but because I just can't be nice to someone I don't like. I can't give money to someone just because I want something from them. It's just not in my nature. But apparently, much more successful people than myself manage to swallow their pride and do what they know in their heart is wrong in order to further their own aims. And I guess we have to be concerned with these things. But I'm more concerned isn't that individuals will do that. It's that government is so compliant in accepting that money to give the waivers to BP, to let Goldman sell derivatives. It's not just Goldman; it's all those guys, starting back with Salmon Brothers. They just created this artificial world and made the government feel that the country was relying on it, that it had to be that way. So how do we change the government? Because if we don't change the government permanently soon, we're going to be in big trouble. You can go look at that website with the debt clock, and you see where we're headed. And you say to yourself, did I borrow that money? Did my neighbor borrow that money? Did anybody I know even think in a million years we would borrow this money? No. The government borrowed the money. The government is in debt. The government turns around and they're upset about people making profits when the government's so far in debt. Who told the government to go so far in debt? Why do we need? If we're borrowing money today, we borrowed money in good times. Today isn't such good times, but we borrowed money in great times, huge amounts of money for non-emergency reasons. What were we thinking was going to happen when we had bad times? Bad times, you got to borrow more money. And before I'll go to break, I'll bring back that analogy about the property taxes down in Miami Beach, where we invested a few years ago, and our property went up, and we were super, super happy. And, value was going up, and the government kept raising the taxes. We said, that's okay. Our property's worth a lot more money, They kept raising the taxes. That's okay. Our income's up a little bit. They kept raising the taxes. Well, eventually the property didn't go up anymore. In fact, it went down quite a bit. And it seemed logical the government would then give us a break on our taxes. They would say, well, your property's not worth as much anymore, so we're going to have to lower your taxes back down to what they were when the property was worth what it's worth today. But that never happened. In fact, you had to fight the assessment. We got a 4% reduction after going up 40% in 3 years. And I was flabbergasted. So I said to a lawyer, I was talking about getting him to handle an appeal beyond the county to the court system. And he says, well, it doesn't matter, John. The government needs that money. The government spent your money already. The government anticipated every dime you were going to give it and more, went out and spent what you were giving it and what everybody else was giving it, and then borrowed more. Why? Who would run a business who would run anything like that? You think government's been around so long that they would know better. Like a company that finally gets its act together after being in business for a while. You'd think they'd understand how it is that you have to be able to survive. But they don't care because the next politician will worry about that problem, or the citizens will have to pay it back. So we're going to go to break now. And if you'd like to call into the station, the number here is 610-664-4100. You're listening to John Federico and Common Sense. Please call in if you have any comments. We're listening to John Federico and listening to Common Sense with John Federico. The number here at the station is 610-664-4100. Hope you'll call in with your questions or your suggestions. We were talking about government and how corrupting and corrupt government is, and why, since government always will be corrupting and corrupt, we need to limit government, shrink government, reduce government as much as possible. And any type of legislation that aims to do that is good legislation. The problem is, of course, that any type of legislation that tries to limit government is going to be opposed by government. Any legislation or any type of rules that are going to be put in place to advance anything but the two parties are going to be opposed by both of those parties, as we talked about in California. So we actually have a caller. Looks like from Westchester, Paul. And hello, Paul.
Hello, John. How are you?
Not bad.
Well, that really struck a chord when you were talking about the government, how mismanaged and poorly run it is. Could you imagine if any of these rascals were trying to run a business?
They wouldn't be able to run a business.
No, they wouldn't. They'd run it. They might run it. They would certainly run it into the ground.
I think they've run us into the ground, and it's so obvious. If you check out that website, Paul, that www.usdebtclock.org, it's scary, and there's nobody saying let's do something about this.
Yeah, it is, and it's unfortunately what it's going to take. It's going to be an awful situation. I don't know when it's coming. If it's coming 6 months from now or 5 or 6 years from now, but we're going to be we're going to have a heap of problems when this all comes to fruition. What's been going on in Washington among both parties for the last 30 years or so.
It's like a big party, and we just weren't invited.
Yeah, it certainly was. It certainly was. And you just look at all of the just down even to the local level, the local municipalities, police forces, and such. They're doing everything they can to bring revenue in, stopping motorists, for violations where in prior years and ticketing them for high offenses, where in prior years the motorist who made the mistake would have gotten off with a warning. It's just
they're doing it just for revenue,
not really bad.
Yeah, not to try to actually make the roads safer, but they actually just doing it for revenue, and that is and the government has so many arrows in its quiver. I mean, it's got, or how's the expression go? If it really wants to bring more money in, it just seems to have all the power, and there's really very little you can do to stop it. Now, I read this in some article about Tennessee adopting, at least for the state, they're making a constitutional amendment not to ever permit income tax on any of their citizens by the state. Kind of an amazing development. And then California, we were talking earlier about, now that's not going to help us with the deficit right now or the debt, but at least they're saying, hey, we're going to change the election. We're changing the election process so that the parties won't necessarily control things. And I'm not, I don't want to disparage the two parties. Parties were, formed for mutual interest at the time and so forth. But I think they're part of the problem today because they're so powerful they resist change.
They certainly do, but even down taking it to the local and the state level, look at these cameras now that are in place in intersections. I really wonder if their primary motivation for that is
Revenue.
as far as reducing accidents, or if the primary purpose for putting these cameras, installing these cameras, is to generate additional revenue. Send the violator a ticket in the mail. Because at 3:30 in the morning he went through a light that was changing from yellow to red.
You know, what's funny is I traveled to Brazil a few times, and they give motorists tickets for seatbelts through the mail from cameras posted on intersections. And if you actually get, I think, 3 of those tickets, they take your license away. But in addition, you have to pay a lot of money, go to school to get it back, and it's crazy. And you look at the way they do that with the money. I mean, when they pass seatbelts, you live in PA, Paul?
Yes, I do. I live in Westchester.
Didn't they tell us that they would only issue the ticket if you were stopped for another violation initially, and then all of a sudden now they can stop you just for the seatbelt, and it's a revenue enhancer. I mean, you know,
that's the way things are going. Just look at legalized gambling in Pennsylvania. How that's all worked out.
And they got that.
Initially, it was just going to be slot machines, and now they're adding table games.
Yeah, they need to keep finding more ways of getting money. I mean, they probably got that money spent already.
I'm certain of that. That's one thing about these politicians. They certainly do know how to spend money.
Absolutely. So, you have any suggestions what we can do other than throw them all out?
Well, I don't know about throwing them all out. I'm certain that there are some very good individual state representatives and assemblymen and what have you, state senators. It's just we have to be informed voters and an informed public and keep track of what's going on. You don't always get that through the major media outlets. They kind of present the news to you through a prism, and obviously that's we do have an advantage today that prior generations did not have with the internet and the success of that, as far as useful information being made available to the general public.
Well, they're trying to. I understand they're trying to regulate that now somehow.
Yeah, well, that's your government at work, I suppose.
Yeah, they don't like the free flow of information.
No, that's especially if the information could be potentially harmful to the powers that be.
So, last question I'll ask you, Paul. Did you vote in the primary recently for the U.S. Senate?
I did vote in the primary. Yes.
What do you think about the fall election? You got Sestak versus Toomey, right?
That's yes. That's the election as it appears now, and I know there have been concerns in recent days over the veracity of some statements made by the Democrat nominee.
Well, you know, it's going to come down
being
to
offered a job.
Don't you think it's going to come down to him just saying it didn't happen?
Well, if that's how it comes down, I guess he can kiss the possibility of electoral success down the drain. It would make him look to be
a liar,
somewhat dishonest, I would suspect. But who knows? Maybe the voters have short memory spans.
Yeah, they usually do. But apparently this is just getting. I think the longer the White House plays it down, the longer it's going to last as an issue.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the Richard Nixon, stonewalling isn't the most effective technique for dealing with damage.
No, and the only way it helps you is if there's another crisis that comes up that's so large that, say, North Korea invades South Korea or something, and all of a sudden you're willing to forget stuff, you know, because that seems to be a scary development the last couple of days.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this world, certainly beyond Philadelphia.
Let's hope the government's got its eye on at least that ball, but we'll see, I guess. Well, Paul, you've been very informed, and I appreciate your call in today. Anything else you wanted to add?
Good talking with you, John. Enjoying today's program.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for listening.
You got it.
Have a nice day. Okay, you're back with John Federico and Common Sense. We got a call from Paul in Westchester. We were talking about government, and it is frustrating if you're a good person and you're looking for a solution out there that you know the problem exists, even at the local level. You see what they're doing. You understand that they're passing laws just to raise more revenue. They're building casinos. Imagine, the state's building is going to be involved in the casinos. They're going to the lottery system isn't enough for them now. They want to allow not just slot games but also table games in Pennsylvania. Not because it's the best thing for the people, because it's going to be a revenue enhancer for the state. I mean, isn't that what it's all about all the time? So I didn't realize. I guess out in Chester County they're having those cameras installed. But that's, I understand you want to keep traffic safe, but do you think you really need a camera there at every intersection to give seatbelt tickets out, or people that go through a red light at 2:00 in the morning? I mean, it's crazy. It's not really helpful to anybody. The cameras, well, they must have done a cash flow on it and said, well, maybe they didn't. It is government after all. But to say, the investment in the camera is going to get paid back 100-fold by how many tickets we're going to give out to these people. But they're taking money all the time out of the same till, and that till is your pocket. So when you look at it, it's so simple if we could just get everybody to go against the government at once, to understand that, yeah, we have a system that wasn't perfect. We had a system always that wasn't perfect. Our system's never been perfect. But capitalism, democracy, freedom of the people, they're issues that have always been shown to be the best system we could develop. Capitalism, they talk about it dying in 2008, and the reality is that capitalism didn't die in 2008. They tried to kill it. They didn't allow it to work. There were certain simple solutions capitalism would have provided. Government didn't want to see those solutions because that would have hurt government's friends. And government doesn't have, let's say, friends. They have sycophants, and vice versa. But they kind of let in our country the same thing that happened like in Soviet Russia, not Soviet Russia, and a post-Soviet Russia. You run into a financial crisis, and oligarchies come in and control the country. And I think that when you look at what's going on with the money, you look at who they gave the money to, you look at who they propped up and who they let fail, and you say very powerful men with moneyed interests control our government. And they control smartly both parties. And that's the thing. If you had more than just the two parties, control would be more difficult to attain for these very, very moneyed and powerful interests. And I am not one to be jealous of those that have, or corporations are successful. I want corporations to be incredibly successful. In fact, I regret that they had to break up AT&T when they did it. When they did it, I was young, very young. I didn't understand why they would have to break up AT&T. It was such a wonderful company. They only broke it up because it was a monopoly. So a company should be allowed to grow as powerful and as financially profitable as it can. And only when it gets to the point of monopoly, the government has to come in and say, okay, you've removed all competition. We have to take an action here. It shouldn't be a vindictive action. It should be a necessary action. And when you see what they do with the financial sector, they just give them so many benefits, theoretically for the betterment of the people, but it's not. It's just to keep they give the money to the financial sector buys the parties turn around and give money back to the financial sector, just like the unions. I mean, the unions, they have their purpose, but you see a union, they give money to say, the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, supports the union, and the union supports the Democratic Party, and sometimes they even support them by giving money to some of the members of the Democratic National Committee. Give money to campaigns for guys that are running for union positions. I mean, it's crazy. You read this stuff and you're like, what? How is that? How can that be right? How can this be in the United States of America? In fact, if you read, and I was mentioning that book before, he seems to be pretty liberal. About halfway through the book now. His name is Simon Johnson. He writes for The Atlantic, but he wrote a book called 13 Bankers. And when you read through that book, you can see how these guys came in cloaked in 2008 undercover and basically took a lot more power than they even had before. They basically went to the Treasury. They got Paulson to go to the president. They got Paulson to go to Congress, the Treasury Secretary, and say, we need, $750 billion now. Or the country's going to fall. We need to have it now. No explanation. 3 sheets of paper. Sign here. And then, of course, it got blown up to this big pork barrel bill that eventually got passed to get all the votes that were needed. But it's a scary situation, and I think it starts with taking our government down. The government's got to come down, and the people have to be the ones that do it. Voting out anybody that voted for. In fact, I think the yard sign should go up in the fall. This man voted for the health care. Get rid of him. This man voted for the stimulus. He's an idiot. This man voted for the bailout. God have mercy on his soul. But we don't want him serving us anymore. He didn't serve us then. He either was too stupid, too naive, or too bought off. And take your choice. Just like they're going to say about Sestak and Obama. Whatever you think about the situation, you have to say one thing. Either Sestak lied, or Obama's lying now or unwilling to tell the truth. Doesn't matter. I don't think it's a bad. I think it happens all the time. He just got caught saying the truth. God forbid a politician would ever say the truth. I think Sestak probably is telling the truth. But God forbid you tell the truth. Now he has to explain. And unfortunately for him, it was in front of a camera. So he's going to come back and say, well, it wasn't really a job. I'm sure some clever guy working for both of them right now is trying to find a solution for this problem. The solution will not be to tell you what really happened. The solution will not be the truth. The solution will be the story they want to sell you. So as we come to a closing here on Thursday, I want to wish you a happy Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully you'll listen next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, to Common Sense with John Federico. If you have questions or comments, our number here at the station, you can't call in now because we're ending the program, but it's 610-664-4100, and maybe come up with some solutions over the weekend about how we can take on our government and bring the rule of the people back to the government instead of having the government continually finding ways of screwing us. So we're going to go to our final break. You've been listening to John Federico with Common Sense. Thank you for listening today.
This is an urgent message. Doctors and drugs are the leading causes of death, more than cancers and heart disease. Big Pharma's control over medicine in our lives is downright deadly. You've lost loved ones from medical poisonings, so wake up now, before it's too late, by picking up your phone right now to get my free health report. I'm Dr. Leonard Horowitz, a Harvard-trained consumer protector and advisor. Choose the world's best alternatives to recover quickly and boost natural immunity. OxySilver, for example, is far safer and more effective than risky vaccinations and toxic antibiotics. OxySilver HealthGuard could change your life